The first thing anybody learned about Skylar was the mark on his neck, a closed ring, an alpha's ring. Halfway through a Tuesday lecture, it started to feel like a lie. It started low and slow, a warmth under his ribs that had nothing to do with the crowded room. He set his pen down. 2 rows in front of him, a boy stopped writing and turned round. Somebody behind him breathed in sharp and swore, insulted. None of them could have told you what they were smelling, only that it was in their chest now and that it was his fault. Then Devon's hand came down on the back of his chair, close enough that Skylar could feel him breathing, and what came out of his mouth did not match his face at all. "Go and wash," he said. "You're making people ill." The row laughed. Devon did not take his hand off the chair, and he stayed there a second longer than the joke needed. Skylar laughed too, because that was the fastest way to end it, and because the truth was the one thing he could never say out loud. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, back to the story. The pharmacy Skylar used was a few stops out from campus, in a part of the city where nobody from the university had any reason to be, above a laundry that pushed warm air into the street all day. He went on Thursdays. He had chosen Thursdays because the woman who worked the counter on Thursdays did not talk much and did not look up much, and after the first few months she had stopped looking at him properly at all. He had his line ready anyway. "Same as usual," he said, counting the cash out onto the counter. "For my sister." She turned to the shelf behind her. Skylar kept his hands flat on the counter and made himself look bored. That was the whole trick, and he was good at it now. The tape over the mirror at the back of the shop had come loose at one corner, and he could see a strip of himself in it. The collar of his jacket, the side of his jaw, the dark line of the ring at his nape where his hair was cut short. Everyone could see it, always, and that was the point of the thing. A closed ring meant alpha, an open one meant omega, a straight bar meant beta. And you got yours before you got a name, and nobody in the history of the world had ever thought about it any harder than they thought about having 10 fingers. "How's she doing on these?" the woman asked, ringing it through. "Fine," Skylar said. "She says they make her sleepy." "They do that." He took the paper bag, put it in his coat, and walked out into the warm laundry air. The whole way to the train he did the arithmetic he always did, counting days against the box in his pocket. And the number came out the same as it had that morning. Not good. Not a problem yet either. He had been buying them since he was 17. The first year, before that, he had stolen them, badly, from a place near his mother's house. And he still went cold thinking about how close he had come to being caught. A boy with an alpha's ring in his neck, standing in an aisle with a box of omega suppressants in his sleeve, and no explanation on this earth that would have made sense to anybody. The lie about a sister had come later, and it worked, because it was small and dull, and nobody chases a dull lie. He did not have a sister. He had a mother who cleaned offices at night, and a scholarship he was terrified of losing, and a flat he shared with a beta named Hansel, who had never asked him why his light had stayed on for days at a time before the winter break. The train came. He got on. Across the aisle, 2 omega girls sat with their hair pinned up the way everybody wore it, necks bare, open rings dark against their skin, and one of them was laughing so hard she had to hold the other one's arm. Skylar looked out the window instead. He had spent a lot of his life being told what he was, and he had believed it right up until the winter he turned 16. He had thought he was dying, honestly and completely. It had started as an ache in his back and gone somewhere else entirely by nightfall. And he had lain on the floor of his mother's bathroom, with the door locked, and his face against the cold tiles, shaking, soaked through, absolutely certain that whatever was happening to him was the sort of thing that killed people. He had thought about calling out. He had got as far as saying her name once, quietly, into his own arm. And then some animal part of him, that he did not recognize, had decided that being found like that was worse than dying, and he had stayed on the floor until it passed and told her afterward it was food poisoning. It came back in the spring, and again after that, and somewhere in there, in the flat gray space between one and the next, Skylar had worked out what it was, because he had sat through the same health classes as everybody else and he knew the word. He simply could not make the word and his own neck exist in the same room. He never said it out loud. Not once, in all that time. There was nobody to say it to. He had run it through in his head a great many times, the imagined conversation, the doctor's face, the pause, the gentleness, and the thing that always stopped him was not that they would call him a liar. It was that they would not. They would be kind. They would look at his ring and then at him. They would find some soft, careful way of telling him that alphas can present strangely sometimes, that stress does remarkable things, that he might like to talk to somebody. Then it would be in his file forever, and the whole rest of his life would be a room he was being gently escorted out of. So he bought his suppressants across town, and he kept his mouth shut, and he got on with it. He was small. That part everyone could see. He was the shortest alpha in his year by a distance that people found funny, light in the shoulders, and he had learned early that when a group of alphas is working out who stands where in a room, being small is a job you get assigned rather than a thing you are. There had been years of it, hands on his head in corridors and chairs pulled out from under him, and somebody asking loudly in front of a group whether he was sure they had read his neck right, and everybody laughing, and Skylar laughing too, because that had turned out to be the fastest way to make it stop. That one had come from Devon. Devon was in his year, in his seminar group, and had been circling him since the first week of term like a dog circling a thing it does not know whether to eat. He was loud and popular and permanently at the center of a group of alphas who all deferred to him, and his entire relationship with Skylar consisted of putting his hands on him and calling it friendship. He would hook an arm round his neck outside the lecture hall, or plant a hand flat on his chest and hold him back a step longer than the joke needed, or take the back of his neck in his palm, right over the ring, gripping, and Skylar's spine would lock while everybody watched and laughed. The others thought it was bullying. It was the reading everybody had, and it was easier for all concerned, and it was almost right. Skylar had known it was not the whole story since the day Devon's hand had gone to his neck, and Skylar had smelled him properly for the first time. Hot vinyl and crushed yarrow, and underneath it something urgent that had absolutely nothing to do with wanting to hurt him. Devon had let go like the skin had burned him. He had not looked at Skylar for days afterward. Then he had come back louder and worse than before. So no, Skylar did not think about it. There was nothing in it to think about. He had a scholarship, he had a mother who worked nights, and he had a box of pills in his coat pocket that had to last him until the end of term. The core lectures in that faculty took every year at once, all of them in the big hall together, and that is how it happened at all. The economics faculty came back from the winter break. Roman was in the third row on the Monday morning. He turned around in his seat and looked at Skylar for a long time, and did not stop. Skylar knew who he was before anybody told him. Everybody knew. Roman was in his final year, top of the faculty for as long as anybody could remember. The name that got said in a certain tone when the lecturers talked about placements, and he was so still that rooms arranged themselves around him without anybody deciding to. He was tall in a way that took up space even sitting down. He did not talk much. When he did, people stopped what they were saying and let him. He was also, and this was said constantly and never quietly, the most looked-at man on campus. Half the Omegas in Skylar's year had a story about Roman, and none of the stories went anywhere, and that only made them better. And he was staring at Skylar, who assumed for the first few seconds that he was looking at somebody behind him. He turned his head. There was a wall behind him. When he turned back, Roman was still looking, elbow hooked over the back of his chair, completely unbothered, the way you look at something you are thinking about buying. Skylar had learned something about alphas the hard way, and often, when you catch one looking at you, he looks away. Every time. He looks away and his jaw goes tight, and afterward he is a little bit crueler to you than he was before, because whatever he felt in that second is now a thing he has to get rid of, and you are the nearest place to put it. Roman did not look away. He held it through the lecturer setting up, and through the shuffle of a full hall opening laptops. He held it long enough that Skylar's face got warm, and his hand tightened on his pen. In the end, it was Skylar who broke, dropping his eyes to the desk like something had been taken off him. When he risked a glance up again, Roman had turned to the front, and he was smiling at nothing. That was the Monday. And on the Wednesday, it happened in the corridor outside the seminar rooms. At the worst possible moment, while Devon had an arm slung across Skylar's shoulders and was explaining to 4 other alphas that Skylar had got the highest mark in the group again and that they should all be embarrassed. Devon's hand was working at the back of Skylar's neck as he said it, thumb dragging over the ring, and Skylar had gone rigid as always and was waiting it out. Roman came down the corridor and slowed. He did not say anything. He looked at Devon's hand, and then he looked at Devon. and something moved through the group that had nothing to do with words. Some quiet arithmetic that alphas do without meaning to. Devon's arm came off Skylar's shoulders. He put both hands in his pockets and laughed at something nobody had said. Roman kept walking. He did not look pleased with himself. He looked like somebody who had moved a chair out of a doorway. "That was weird," one of the others said. "That was nothing," said Devon. Skylar went to his seminar and got through an hour of demand curves without absorbing a single one of them. And it took him until the middle of the afternoon to work out why he was so angry about it. It had worked, because somebody had walked past and a hand had come off his neck, and no part of that had involved Skylar doing anything at all. He did not want to be the thing a hand comes off, and there was nowhere useful to put that. So he carried it around for a week. The scent slip happened the following week. It should not have. He had counted it out twice. But suppressants are not a wall. They are a hand held over a lamp. And there are days when the light gets through the fingers anyway. And that Tuesday he woke up knowing that something in him had shifted about a degree, and he took his dose and went in anyway because he had a midterm paper due and no version of his life that allowed him to stay in bed. For the first hour it was fine. Then the hall filled up and the air went stale as it always does in a room that full, and the warmth started under his ribs, and Skylar put his pen down very carefully and understood that he had made a mistake. The boy in front of him stopped writing and sat back. Somebody along the row made a small sound and covered it with a cough, and a bag got knocked over. And then, in a spreading ring outward from where Skylar sat, the entire alpha population of that lecture hall stopped listening to the lecture. He kept his eyes on the board. He could feel it happening at the back of his neck. He knew exactly what they were getting, because it had happened twice before in smaller rooms and he had spent both times afterward shaking in a toilet cubicle. It came off him as slow and crushed hazel leaf, dark and green at once, with something warm and sweet underneath it like beeswax held in a closed hand, and the suppressants bent all of it into something none of them could put a name to. And that was the worst part. If it had been a smell they recognized, they could have dismissed it. What none of them could do was stop chasing something they could not identify. And because they could not identify it, and because they could all see the closed ring on the back of his neck, Skylar could feel the whole room deciding the same thing at once. This was being done to them. Somebody muttered a word. Somebody else laughed, too loud and not amused. A boy 2 seats along shoved his chair back a foot and glared at Skylar with his ears burning red, like Skylar had put a hand on him in public. Then Devon's hand came down on the back of his chair. He had come from the row behind. He crouched into the gap beside Skylar's shoulder, close, and Skylar could feel the tension going through his fingers into the plastic, and when he spoke the smirk was doing one thing, and his voice was doing another entirely. "Sort yourself out," he said, low. And it did not come out as an insult at all. "I don't know what you mean." "Yeah, you do. It's the room. Everyone's warm in here." Devon's face was very close. His pupils were blown wide and he had not blinked in a while. And his hand slid an inch along the back of the chair until his knuckles were against Skylar's shoulder blade. And he stayed there, breathing, doing the last thing on earth he wanted to be seen doing. He did not say what it was. None of them ever said what it was. That was the arrangement the whole room had with itself, and Skylar had understood it since he was 16, that they could feel whatever they liked as long as nobody put it into words, and that the bill for it always came to him. So they called it something else. They said he stank. They said he needed a wash, that there was something off about him, that he was doing it on purpose, and the ones who had stared longest were always the ones who said the worst of it afterward. Then Devon heard himself, or saw somebody watching, and came apart into the version of himself that everybody knew. "You smell like a girl," he said loudly, and pushed off the chair hard enough to rock it, and the whole row laughed. And Skylar laughed too, because that was the fastest way to end it. He got out through the side door before the lecture finished. He made it some way down the corridor before the shaking started. The stairwell at the end of the languages block was empty, because nobody used it. And he sat down on the second step with his back against the wall and put his head in his hands and did the arithmetic again. Badly, twice, getting a different answer both times. The door at the bottom of the stairwell opened. Skylar looked up, ready to be found, ready with an excuse about a migraine, and Roman was standing at the bottom of the stairs with Skylar's bag in one hand, the one he had left under his seat. He did not come up. Skylar noticed that before anything else. He stopped at the bottom, a few strides away, and set the bag down on the floor between them like a man putting food at the edge of a field. "You left this," he said. "Thanks. Do you want me to go?" Skylar opened his mouth to say yes. He was aware of every place in his body that was too warm, and of the fact that he had been sweating through his shirt for the better part of an hour, and of the terrible clarity that he was sitting in an enclosed concrete space with the highest-ranked alpha in the faculty and nowhere behind him to go. Roman had not moved an inch. His hands were open at his sides. "You're going to want to sit further down," Skylar said. "Or not sit." "Why?" "Because everyone in that hall just lost their minds, and I'd rather not do this twice in one day." Roman's mouth did something at that, and it was not what Skylar was braced for. He did not lean in, and he did not do the thing where an alpha squares up and gets interested. He looked for a moment, honestly sad about something, and then he sat down where he was, at the bottom of the stairs, with his back against the far wall and the whole flight between them. "I'm not going to do anything to you," he said. "Sit there until it passes. I'll wait at the bottom so nobody comes in." Skylar stared at him. "You don't know what's happening to me." "No," Roman agreed. "But you clearly do, and you clearly can't tell anyone, so I'm not going to ask." They stayed like that while the corridor outside emptied and filled and emptied again. Roman took a book out of his own bag and read it. Every so often the door at the bottom would start to open, and he would say, without looking up, that the stairwell was closed. Whoever it was would apologize to him and go away, because people did that with him. When it finally let go of Skylar, he felt scraped out and clumsy and very young. He came down the stairs holding the rail. Roman stood up and stepped back to give him the doorway. It was such a small thing. Skylar could not remember the last time an alpha had made room for him without being made to. "I'm fine," Skylar said. "All right. I mean it. Whatever you think that was." Roman held the door open with his forearm. Up close, he smelled like dry laurel and black rye with something dark and sweet underneath. Treacle, maybe. And Skylar had to look at the floor for reasons he was not going to examine. "I don't think anything," Roman said. "I noticed you in October. This didn't start today." Then he walked off toward the library and left Skylar standing in a doorway with his mouth open. He avoided him for a while after that, and it took real work, because it turned out that once you start avoiding a person, you discover exactly how much of your day they were already in. Skylar changed which entrance he used. He sat at the back of the big hall and left before the end. He took the long way past the sports center in the rain rather than cross the courtyard where Roman ate his lunch on the wall with 2 friends and 1 book, and it did not matter, because Roman kept finding him anyway, in the mildest possible way, and never once cornered him. A bottle of water turned up on Skylar's desk one morning before a long exam, unopened, with nobody near it. And then last year's seminar notes appeared in his pigeonhole in handwriting he did not recognize, with the hard weeks marked. Then there was the evening he came out of his shift at the bakery at the wrong end of the night, and found Roman leaning against the wall opposite with his hood up, who fell into step beside him, and walked him to his building and talked about absolutely nothing, football and a lecturer's terrible slides, and whether the bread they were throwing out was still good, and then said goodnight at the door and left. There had been a moment at the door. Before that, Roman had stopped talking mid-sentence and stepped in to let a woman pass with her shopping. And there had been no room on that step for the 2 of them, so for a second Skylar had his back against the door and Roman's hand braced on the frame above his shoulder and Roman's coat against his chest. Neither of them moved after the woman had gone. Skylar could feel the warmth coming off him. He could smell the laurel and the rye and that dark sweetness under it. And his own body did something quick and humiliating and entirely outside his control. And Roman's breathing changed, and he knew that Roman had caught it. Then Roman took his hand off the frame and stepped back into the rain and said goodnight like nothing had happened at all, and Skylar got the door open on the 3rd try. Skylar stood in the stairwell of his own building afterward with his keys in his hand and thought, with something close to panic, that nobody had ever taken care of him in a way that did not cost him anything. Hansel had noticed. Hansel noticed everything and asked about none of it, and their whole friendship ran on that. And he was flat on his bed with his feet on the wall when Skylar came in. "Roman walked you home," Hansel said. "He was going that way. He lives over by the old bookshop. That's the wrong way entirely. Then he was lost. Hansol let it go, as he always did. And then he did not let it go, because he was worried, and he was bad at hiding it. You went off somewhere for days before the break, he said. And you came back looking like you'd been in a car accident. And I never said anything about it. And I'm not going to. But you don't have to do everything on your own is all. I know. You don't, though. Skylar put his coat on the hook and stood there for a moment with his back to the room, because his eyes had gone hot and there was no version of himself that would survive being asked one more question. The mark on his neck was right there, on display, the way everybody's was. Hansol's straight beta bar sat above his collar in exactly the same way. There was no reason in the world for anybody to look at Skylar's ring and see anything other than what it said. I'm fine, he said, genuinely. That was the week Hansol set him up with Nico. It was not framed as being set up. It was a few people getting food, and then most of those people mysteriously having somewhere else to be. Then it was Skylar across a table from a friendly, funny Omega from the languages faculty, who had lovely eyes and laughed at the right places and made it about as easy as anybody could have made it. Skylar tried, and what stayed with him afterward was that he really did try. He asked good questions and walked him home. And at the door, Nico turned around and tipped his head back, offering the line of his neck and the open ring on it. Warm and honest, and asking for exactly nothing more than a yes, and Skylar stood there and felt nothing at all, and then felt sick, because the shape of the moment was familiar in the wrong direction. He knew what it was to be the one tipping his head back. He had felt it in his own body in a locked bathroom when he was 16. He was standing on the wrong side of the door, and he always had been. He said something kind. He walked home the long way. It was the second time he had done that to somebody, and the second time he had gone home and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and thought that whatever was wrong with him was not going to be fixed by trying harder. It was raining the day Roman said it out loud, and the canteen was full because of it. Skylar was at a table near the middle with Hansol and two others, and Devon's group was 3 tables over being loud. And it was an ordinary Thursday in every possible way until the room did that thing rooms do, where the noise level drops a fraction without anybody deciding to be quiet. Roman was crossing the floor. He came the whole way over with his tray in one hand, not looking at anybody else, and stopped at the end of Skylar's table. By the time he got there, the tables on either side had stopped talking. I've been trying to get you on your own for a month, he said. You keep leaving rooms I walk into. Skylar's fork was still in his hand. It isn't. Somebody at the next table laughed nervously. Roman ignored it completely. I like you, he said. I've liked you since October. I'm not going to keep doing it from the other side of the courtyard. Because that's the kind of thing that ends up with you thinking I'm following you around. And I'd rather just say it. So I'm saying it. Have dinner with me. Skylar had never in his life sat inside a silence like the one that came after that. Everyone in that room had heard it, and every one of them had also seen the closed ring on the back of Skylar's neck, because that is what a nape is for. And there was one conclusion available to all of them, and it went around that canteen like a dropped glass. Somebody said what the hell out loud. A girl behind Skylar breathed in and did not breathe out. At Devon's table, one of the alphas stood halfway up, sat down again, and stared at Roman with his face draining of color. Because it did not happen, and it was not against any law either. It was simply not a thing people did. Roman stood there in the middle of all of it with his tray in his hand, completely at ease, waiting for an answer. And the terrible thing, the thing Skylar could not stop looking at, was that he was not embarrassed. Not a flicker of it. He had said it in front of the entire faculty in the same voice he would have used to ask for the salt. No, Skylar said. Roman nodded slowly, as if that was a reasonable answer to a reasonable question. All right, he said. Ask me again if it changes. That's not how that works. It's how I do it. He turned to go, and then he stopped. And he said the thing that took the whole room apart. And he said it like it was obvious. And I know what's on your neck, he said. It doesn't come into it. It never did. He walked out into the rain and the canteen exploded behind him. Skylar sat in the middle of it with his hands flat on the table. Somebody was laughing too hard. Somebody else was saying it must be a joke, that it had to be a bet, that Roman was winding somebody up. Two omegas at the window table were looking at Skylar the way you look at a person who has taken something out of your bag, and one of them had been crying by the time they left, and Skylar knew with absolute certainty that by the end of the day, he would be the reason, in every telling of it. Hansel leaned over. "Are you okay?" "I have to go," Skylar said. He got as far as the corridor outside the lecture block before Devon caught him. He came fast, out of the side door, and got a handful of Skylar's jacket and put him into the wall between two notice boards, hard enough to knock the air out of him. "Say it was a joke," Devon said. Skylar's head had hit the plaster. He waited for the room to settle. "Get off me. Say it was a joke. Say he was being funny." Devon's forearm was across his chest and his face was too close and his voice had gone down into that other register again, the one that only came out when he had his hands on him. "Because he doesn't do that. He doesn't even talk to people, and he walked across the whole canteen for you. Ask him about it." "I'm asking you." "Why?" Skylar said. He had never asked Devon a question before, and it stopped him dead. Devon's grip changed, loosened, and for a second the whole horrible truth of it was standing there in the corridor with them both. And Skylar could smell it coming off him in waves, hot vinyl and yarrow gone sharp and desperate, and he watched Devon realize that Skylar could smell it. "You've got a ring like mine," Devon said. He said it quietly, which was worse than shouting. "You've got the same mark I have, so whatever it is you're doing, in that hall and in every seminar since October, it's a trick, and I don't know how you're doing it, and I'm not going to be the one who ends up looking like an idiot over it. I'm not doing anything to you. You did it to a whole lecture hall. Everyone saw." "I know," Skylar said. And his voice must have come out wrong, because Devon let go of his jacket and stepped back like he had been caught holding something. "Fix it," he said. "How?" Devon did not have an answer to that. He stood in the corridor breathing, this big, loud, popular boy with his ears red and his hands opening and closing, and then he did what he always did and made it into a joke that everybody could live inside. "Nobody's going to believe him anyway," he said, walking backward toward the door. "Nobody's going to believe a word of it. He'll be embarrassed by tomorrow." The rain was still going when Skylar got outside. Roman was on the low wall by the bike racks with his hood up. Not sheltering, just sitting in it. Skylar walked straight past him, then he stopped and came back, and it was the most honest thing he had done in years. "You've ruined my life," he said. "Probably," said Roman. "There's no probably. I had a manageable amount of people looking at me, and now I have all of them. Do you know what they're going to say about me by Monday?" "Yes." "Then why?" Roman looked up at him from under the hood. Water was coming off the end of his nose, and he had not bothered to wipe it away. "Because you were going to keep leaving rooms," he said. "And because you looked at me in that stairwell like you were working out how fast you could get past me. I didn't want another month of that. No, in front of everyone is fine. That other thing wasn't." Skylar stood in the rain and could not think of one thing to say. "Also, I meant it," Roman said. "That part isn't strategy. You don't know me. You read the extra papers." "Nobody reads the extra papers." He stood up off the wall. "You laugh a beat after everyone else, which means you're checking first. You work nights and you lie about it. And something happens to you that you deal with on your own. And I don't know what it is, and I'm not asking. Everyone thinks you've lost your mind. They'll get over it." "They won't," Skylar said. "You don't understand, because nothing has ever happened to you. You'll walk into a room next week and they'll all still be polite. Because it's you. It doesn't work like that for me. It never has." Roman went quiet, and Skylar watched it land, and then put his hand over his own mouth. "That's fair," Roman said. "I'm not trying to be cruel. You weren't." He pushed his hood back so the rain got at his face properly. "Say no again, if it's a no. I'll leave you alone, and I'll mean it. But say it now. I'm not going to keep asking, because at some point that stops being a question and turns into pressure, and I don't want to be that." There was a puddle spreading over the flagstones between them, and Skylar was watching it because he could not look up. "I can't," he said. "Can't what?" "That. Any of it. I do want to. That isn't. That's not the problem. I can't." His voice came apart in the middle of the sentence, and he stopped and started again, and it came out worse. "You don't know what you're asking for. You think you do. Roman crossed the space between them and stopped a little closer than was polite. And Skylar felt his own back come up against the wall of the bike shelter with no memory of having moved. "Then tell me," Roman said. "No. All right." He did not touch him. He stood there with the rain coming off both of them. And Skylar's hands had come up between them at some point and were resting flat against Roman's chest, and he could not have said whether they had got there to push him away. He could feel Roman breathing under his palms. The smell of him was so close that Skylar's eyes stung with it. Laurel and rye and that dark sweetness under, and every instinct Skylar had spent years strangling stood up at once and tipped his head back before his mind had voted on it. Roman's breath went out of him hard. "Skylar, I know. If you do that again, I'm going to kiss you. So do it on purpose or don't do it." "On purpose," Skylar said. Roman kissed him against the side of the bike shelter with the rain coming down on both of them. It was not gentle, and it was not rushed. Roman had made his mind up months ago, and was finally getting to put his hands somewhere. One at Skylar's jaw, and one flat at the small of his back, pulling him in until there was no daylight left, and Skylar heard the sound he made against Roman's mouth and did not recognize it as his own. His fingers went into the front of Roman's shirt and pulled. Roman's hand slid up from the small of his back under the hem of his jacket, palm against the wet cotton over his spine, and stopped there deliberately. And Skylar understood that he was being careful of the neck, that he was not going to go anywhere near the ring without being asked, and it was the carefulness that took his legs out from under him. He broke it first. He had to. He put his forehead against Roman's collarbone and stood there shaking, breathing him in the way he had never let himself. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Before anything. And you're going to want to leave. 5. Right in Kriang. Right in Kriang has one to weigh. Let's the press day. Right in Kriang has one to weigh." "Not here," Roman said into his hair. "You're freezing. Come to mine." Roman's flat was above a shuttered bookshop, 2 rooms and a kitchen, and it did not fit him at all. Skylar noticed that and put it away with all the other small things he had been putting away for weeks. The building had a lift and a proper entryway. There was a coat on the hook by the door that cost more than Skylar's mother earned in a month. When he asked whose it was, Roman said a family friend's, and moved the conversation somewhere else with a speed that Skylar noted and did not question, because everybody has one thing they do not want to talk about, and Skylar, of all people, was in no position to go picking at anybody else's. Roman gave him a dry shirt and made tea and sat down on the far end of the sofa, and then, seeing Skylar still standing, moved to the armchair instead so that the sofa was entirely his. "Say it however it comes out," he said. Skylar had rehearsed this conversation for years with imaginary strangers, and every single version had been a speech, and now that he was in it, there was nothing in his head at all. "When I was 16, he started, and stopped. Roman waited. "I thought I was dying. There was a night, in my mum's bathroom, and I thought that was it. That was how I was going out, on the floor, and I couldn't call her because—" He stopped again. "It happened again in the spring, and then again. It happens every few months, and I know exactly what it is because everybody knows what it is. We all sat through the same lessons, and I can't." He put the heels of his hands against his eyes. "I get heats," he said. The word came out of him for the first time in his life, and it did not sound like anything. It was such a small, ordinary word. "I've had them since I was 16. I buy suppressants across town, and I tell them they're for a sister I don't have. I've never had a rut. I've never had one. Not once. And I've lied about it to everybody I've ever met." He was talking fast now, because if he stopped, he would not start again. "So whatever you think you saw in that stairwell, that's what it was. That's what happened in the lecture hall. That's what Devin can smell on me and can't explain and hates me for. My neck says one thing, and my body has been doing something else since I was 16. And there's nobody to say that to, because there's a mark on me, and a mark doesn't get to be wrong." So, nothing moved in the flat. "I'm an omega," Skylar said. "I know how that sounds coming from someone with this on his neck. I know exactly how it sounds." He made himself look up, because he had decided on the walk over that if this was going to be the end of it, he was at least going to see it happen. Roman had not moved. He was sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, and his face had not done any of the things Skylar had spent years dreading. There was no gentleness in it, and that was what Skylar could not get over afterward. Nothing soft, no careful pity, nothing being worked out behind his eyes. "Okay," Roman said. "Okay. You've been carrying that on your own since you were 16. Did you hear what I said?" "I heard all of it." Roman got up and crossed the room and crouched down in front of him so that he was looking up at Skylar instead of down. "I'm not confused, if that's what you're waiting for. I've been standing next to you. I know what I get when I'm near you, and it has never once matched what's on your neck, and I stopped caring which of those two things was right the first week of term. It's not a small thing." "No," Roman said. "It's the biggest thing anybody's ever said to me." He stopped and started again. "I haven't got anything clever for it. I just believe you." Skylar started crying then, which he had not done in front of another person since he was a child, and he did it badly and briefly and with his hand over his mouth, furious about it the entire time. Roman stayed where he was on the floor and let him, and did not say anything soothing. And when it was over, he handed him the tea, which had gone cold, and neither of them mentioned that. "There's one condition," Roman said. "Here it comes. You stop buying them across town. There's a place near the station with a delivery service and no counter. I'll send you the link." He said it exactly the way he would have said anything else. "If somebody recognizes you in that pharmacy one day, you've got no story." Skylar laughed, wetly, and could not stop for a while. "That's your condition." "It's the only useful thing I know," Roman said. "The rest of it I can't fix." He walked Skylar to the door at the end of it, and Skylar stopped in the hallway with his coat half on, because there was one more thing and it had been sitting under everything else all evening. "Aren't you going to ask to see it?" he said. "See what?" "The mark. Everyone wants to look at things they've been told about." Roman was quiet for a second. "Do you want me to look at it?" And that was the whole question, and nobody had ever asked him any version of it before, and Skylar found himself turning around in a hallway with his heart going like a fist against his ribs and reaching back and pulling his collar down. Behind him, the room had gone quiet. He felt Roman come closer, and the warmth of him arrive at his back, and then Roman's fingers, careful, moving the hair at his nape aside, and Skylar's whole body went loose in a way he had absolutely no defense against. Nobody touched an alpha's neck. It was the rudest thing you could do to a man, and Devon had made a habit of it in corridors, and Skylar's spine had locked every time. This was not that. This was a thumb moving slowly along the underside of the ring, and a man breathing out unevenly behind him. "It's a closed ring," Roman said. "I know what it is. I'm telling you what I see, because you asked me to look." His mouth came down, not quite touching, close enough that Skylar felt the shape of the words on his skin. "And I'm telling you it doesn't change anything I want." Skylar's hand came back and found the doorframe. His knees had made a decision without him. Roman's palm settled at the front of his throat, not gripping, just holding him upright. And his mouth finally landed at the join of neck and shoulder, and the sound Skylar made was not a word. "Tell me to stop," Roman said into his skin. "Don't. That's not the same as no." "I'm not saying no," Skylar said. "I'm not. Don't stop." They did not get past the hallway. Skylar's back met the wall, and Roman's hands were at his waist and then under his shirt, wide and warm and unhurried, and Skylar had spent years so terrified of his own body that he had forgotten there was any version of this that was good, and it turned out there was. And it was this. And he was making a great deal of noise about it. Roman's mouth went along his jaw, down under his ear, back to his mouth. Skylar got a fistful of his shirt and pulled him in harder. Roman said his name once against his lips in a voice that had gone completely to pieces. Then Skylar's hands came up flat between them and he pushed, not hard, and Roman stopped instantly and stepped back and stood there breathing. "Sorry," Skylar said. "I can't. I need. Give me a minute. Take as long as you want. It's not you." "I know it isn't." Roman put his hands in his pockets. Skylar worked out later that it was the only way he had of guaranteeing where they would be. "People want things off me all the time. Nobody ever asks you anything. I'm not in a hurry." Skylar hit his shoulder with the flat of his hand, hard enough to matter. And Roman laughed, which was a thing he almost never did in public, and Skylar decided on the spot that he would be doing whatever was necessary to hear it again. They had a handful of weeks after that, and Skylar would go back over those weeks for a long time. They were careful, and then less careful, and then not careful at all. They studied in the all-night room at the back of the library, on opposite sides of the table so as not to be obvious. And under it, Roman's ankle would be hooked around Skylar's the entire time, and once, late, with the place empty, Roman's foot moved slowly up the inside of Skylar's calf and stayed there, and Skylar had to read the same paragraph 4 times and eventually put his head down on his arms and laugh at the ceiling. On the nights Skylar worked, Roman started turning up at closing with wet hair, standing in the way behind the counter while Skylar wiped down. Useless. Eating the ends of things that were going in the bin anyway, arguing with him about a lecturer they both hated. Skylar learned that Roman was funny, which nobody knew, and that he hated being asked what he was going to do after graduation, and that he sent his mother a message every morning and never mentioned it. There was a night in the stockroom at the bakery, after closing, that Skylar thought about for the rest of the year. Roman had come to walk him home and had ended up backed into the shelving with flour on his sleeve and Skylar's mouth on his throat, and Skylar had discovered, with his hands under Roman's shirt and Roman's breath going ragged above him, that he liked being the one doing it. He got both hands flat on Roman's chest and held him against the shelves and kissed him until Roman made a low sound and said his name like a warning, and Skylar said, "I'm not stopping," and did not stop, and it was Roman in the end who caught his wrists and pressed his forehead to Skylar's shoulder and said, in a voice that had gone completely apart, that they were going to have to go home right now. They walked back through the wet streets, not touching each other, and both of them knew exactly why. He learned that Roman got angry about exactly one thing, which was other people touching Skylar. It never came out loudly. It came out as Roman standing up from a bench, or moving one pace so that he was between two things, or a hand at the base of Skylar's spine steering him out of a crowd, and Skylar found that he minded it a great deal less than he was prepared to admit. It came out properly, only once. They were in the all-night room one evening, and a boy at the next table said something about Skylar under his breath to his friend, and Roman did not stand up and did not raise his voice. He simply said the boy's name, and his voice dropped half a step into something that was not the same as talking. Every alpha in that room stopped moving. The boy's chair scraped back, and he apologized to the carpet and left with his bag half open. Roman sat there afterward with his hands flat on the table looking sick about it, and he said, not really to Skylar, that he hated doing that. And then he did not say anything else for a while. They fought too, about the flat above the bookshop. Once, badly, when Skylar asked a direct question about it and Roman went so smooth and so fast that Skylar knew he was lying and let it go anyway. They fought about the fact that Roman wanted to stop hiding, and Skylar could not, would not, and said so. "You can walk into any room in that building," Skylar said. "You could tell them all tomorrow, and by graduation, it'd be a funny story about the year you went strange. I'd be a case. Then let me handle it. There it is. That's not what I meant. It's what you said." Skylar had his coat on, and one hand on the door, and he was so tired. Everybody's always handling it. Every single person who has ever looked at my neck has handled it. I've had my whole life decided for me by people looking at a ring, and I'm not doing it again with you. If it stops being a secret, I'll be the one who stops it. Roman looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said. "It's yours. I'll follow you on it." And he meant it, and he kept to it, and that was the last good conversation they had before it all came apart. The photographs were taken in the alley behind the bakery, on a Wednesday, at closing. Skylar was shown them once, later, turned round on a desk so he could see them the right way up, and he did not let himself think for very long about how many nights Devon must have stood in that alley. The pictures were not even particularly incriminating, and somehow that was worse. Roman with his back against the wall, and Skylar leaning into him. Roman's hand on the back of Skylar's neck, both of their napes visible, 2 closed rings, 1 photograph, and there was nothing else in it that needed explaining to anyone. They went to the faculty office on a Monday morning with a complaint form signed at the bottom, because a complaint has to be signed, along with a printed note about conduct and about the reputation of the department, and by the middle of that week Skylar had a letter in his pigeonhole, asking him to attend a meeting regarding the terms of his scholarship, And there is nothing in the world that turns a person's stomach faster than the word regarding. There were 3 of them behind the desk and 1 chair on Skylar's side of it. They were not cruel. He had to keep reminding himself of that afterward, when he was going over it in the worst part of the night. Nobody in that room shouted at him or called him anything. The woman in the middle had a kind face and said the word unusual several times. The man on the left explained that the scholarship carried a conduct requirement and that the department had received a complaint expressing concern about the well-being of a first-year student, and that the concern related to a relationship with a final-year student that was, and he actually paused here to find a word, atypical. Atypical, Skylar said. 2 alphas, said the woman kindly. You understand our difficulty. There's no rule against it. There's no rule against a great many things, because nobody has ever needed one. She turned a page. There's a question of pressure, of one student in a position of some standing and another student on a funded place. You can see how it looks. He hasn't pressured me. Then help us understand it. And there it was, sitting in the middle of the table, and Skylar could see the whole shape of it. There was 1 sentence that explained everything. 1 sentence, and every question in that room would dissolve, and he could not say it, because a man with a closed ring on his neck saying that sentence in front of 3 members of faculty does not get believed, he gets referred. He said nothing. They wrote something down. The medical review came the following week, and that was the one that broke something in him. It was framed as support. Student well-being, a welfare check, entirely routine, and the doctor was a beta in his 50s with reading glasses and a gentle way of asking things. And Skylar, sitting on the paper-covered bed with his coat still in his lap, made a decision he had not planned to make. He told him, not all of it, but enough. That he had been having cycles since he was 16. That they came every few months and lasted the better part of a week. That he had been managing them with omega suppressants he had got hold of privately. He said the word out loud for only the 2nd time in his life, in a small room with a window that did not open, to a man whose entire job was to know about this. The doctor listened without interrupting. He took notes. A nurse had taken bloods off him the week the review was arranged, and the numbers were up on the screen at the doctor's elbow now, and Skylar watched his eyes move down the page and stop, and go back up, and stop again, and something in Skylar's chest lifted for the first time in years, because he could see the man reading it. Your levels are unusual, the doctor said. Yes, quite considerably outside the alpha range. Yes, Skylar said, and his voice cracked on it. The doctor took his glasses off. There's a condition, he said, which is rare but well documented, where an alpha's system fails to establish properly during adolescence. The presentation can be confusing. Some patients describe symptoms that they interpret as omega cycles, and there's a strong psychological component to it, particularly where there's been social difficulty around designation, bullying, that kind of thing. I would guess there has been some of that. Skylar sat there on the paper with his coat in his lap. I'm not confused, he said. Of course not. I'm not saying you are. The doctor's voice got kinder. That was the unbearable part. I'm saying there's a name for it, and that it's treatable, and that you should not have been managing it alone with medication that wasn't prescribed for you, because that's genuinely dangerous. I'd like to start you on something appropriate, and I'd like you to see someone to talk to. That's not a judgment. You just read the numbers. I did. And your explanation for the numbers is that I'm a broken alpha. My explanation, the doctor said, is the one that fits what we know. He said it apologetically. He was stating an obvious fact about the world, and that is what it was. Your mark is a closed ring. I've been doing this for 30 years and I've never seen one be wrong, and neither has anybody else. So we work from there. It's not that I don't believe you, it's that there isn't anywhere else to go. Skylar walked out of the health center and got about as far as the car park before his legs stopped working properly, and he sat down on a low wall in the cold. He had always assumed that nobody would listen. It had not once occurred to him that they would listen, and take notes, and read the numbers, and be kind to him about it for the rest of his life. He did not tell Roman about the appointment. He meant to. He got as far as typing it out twice. What he did not know was that Roman had spent that same week doing something else. Roman had gone home, not to the flat above the bookshop, which had never been a family friend's place at all, but to the house on the other side of the park with the gravel drive that Skylar had never been told about, where his father had been waiting for him since the photographs arrived, because of course they had gone to the family too, since the family's name was on the funding for 2 of the buildings on that campus. Skylar found out about the house the way he found out about everything, last, and from the wrong person. Devin caught him outside the library on the Thursday, and there was no shove this time and no arm across the chest, and that was how Skylar knew it was going to be bad. Devin looked like he had not slept, and like somebody who had done a thing and then had to keep living in the same week as it. "Your file's closed," he said. "What?" "The scholarship thing. It's dead. They dropped it yesterday." He laughed. "And there was nothing in it." "Do you know why they dropped it?" "Because his father made a call. Because his father is the reason half that faculty gets paid. I sent them everything I had and it went quiet in an afternoon. That's what I am to people like that." Skylar did not move. "You didn't know," Devin said, and then, quieter, "He didn't tell you." "Tell me what?" "That his family's name is on 2 of the buildings you walk into every day." Devin's mouth twisted around it. "That's who you've been letting walk you home. Ask him what he had to give them for it." There was a bench outside the library, and Skylar had to use it. He sat there and put together every small thing he had been putting away for weeks, and it took no time at all once he let himself do it. The coat on the hook and the flat with the lift, and the speed with which Roman had changed the subject that night, and the fact that a man who slept on a mattress in the north of the city had never looked worried about money in his life, and underneath all of it, the fact that Roman had never once been afraid of anything, in any room, in any situation, and Skylar had thought that was courage. He went to the flat. Roman opened the door, and Skylar knew from his face that he already knew what this was. "Say it," Skylar said. And Roman, to his credit, did not lie. He said his father's name, and that the money and the building and the flat were all the same thing, and that he had gone home, and that his father had made the complaint disappear inside a day. "And what did he want?" Skylar said. Roman did not answer. "What did he want, Roman?" "He wants me to end it," Roman said. "He wants me to end it, publicly, and go to the placement in the spring, and he'll leave you alone. If I don't, the file reopens, and it won't be a conduct meeting next time. It'll be your funding and your place and your record, and he'll do it slowly enough that it looks like nobody did anything at all." The room was very quiet. "So do it," Skylar said. "No, do it. Take it. That's my whole life he's holding, and you know it is. I'm not doing that. You don't get to be brave with my scholarship." Skylar's voice had gone up, and he could not get it back down. "You've never had to be scared of anything. That isn't brave. It's just, nothing's ever cost you anything. This costs me. Take the deal." Roman crossed the room and got hold of him by the shoulders. "I will fix it," he said. "Give me a week. Do not do anything. Do not go to anyone. Let me fix it." And Skylar, who had spent his entire life being handled, heard the whole sentence and only heard one part of it. "There it is again," he said. He left. Roman said his name twice on the stairs, and Skylar kept going, and the door at the bottom shut behind him with a sound he thought about for weeks afterward. His heat came days later. He knew it was coming from the middle of the Sunday. He had been off the suppressants for over a week, because the order he had put in during the week of the meetings was still sitting somewhere in the post, and he had not been able to make himself go and stand at a counter and ask for more, and so he did the only thing left, and texted Hansel, who was at his parents' for the week, to say he had flu, and then lock the door, close the curtains, and get through it the way he had got through every single one since he was 16. It was the worst he had ever had. It came in hard, and it did not let go. And by the second day, he was on the floor by the bed, because the bed was too far away, wrapped in everything he owned, out of his mind with a need he had no word for, and nothing to put it on. He said Roman's name out loud into the dark more than once. He knew he had done it, and he could not stop. And on the second night, somebody knocked on his door. Skylar got as far as the middle of the room before he smelled who it was through the gap under it, hot vinyl and crushed yarrow. "I know you're in there," Devin said. Skylar did not answer. He stood in the middle of the dark room with his hand over his mouth and every muscle in him pulled tight. And on the other side of the door he could hear Devin breathing. "Hansel said you had flu," Devin said. "You haven't got flu." The handle moved and found the lock, and the lock held. "I can smell it from the stairwell." His voice had gone into that low register, and it was shaking now. "There's something wrong with you, and there's something wrong with me, and I don't know which of those came first. So, you're going to open this door and tell me what it is." "Go away," Skylar said. It came out cracked and thin and completely wrong, and Devon heard exactly what it did to him. And there was a long silence on the other side of that door in which two things could have happened. "Please go away," Skylar said again. He heard Devon's forehead hit the wood, and then him swearing. Once, with real feeling, at himself rather than at anybody else. "You need somebody," Devon said. "Not you." "No." A pause. "Yeah." And then, and Skylar did not learn this until much later, Devon went down the stairs and phoned a man he hated and told him where to go. Roman did not knock. He sat down on the floor of the corridor with his back against Skylar's door, and he said, through it, that he was there, and that he was not coming in, and that he would sit there until he was told otherwise. Then he did exactly that. Skylar lay on the other side of the door with his cheek on the floorboards and his hand flat against the wood. And the two of them stayed like that for hours, breathing on either side of an inch of pine, and every so often Roman would say something ordinary about nothing at all, the way you talk to somebody who cannot answer. When Skylar finally got the lock open, it was the middle of the night and he could not stand up. Roman came in and shut the door with his foot and got him off the floor. And he did not do a single one of the things Skylar's body was screaming for. He put him in the bed. He got the curtains fully closed. He soaked a cloth in cold water and put it at the back of Skylar's neck, over the ring. Skylar made a sound at that which he was never going to be able to explain. Roman sat on the floor beside the bed with his back against the mattress and stayed there. The room had changed by then. Skylar noticed it in a clear moment somewhere in the middle of that night, that the air did not smell like him, and did not smell like Roman either, that the two of them together had made a third thing, something like a shop after closing, lights off, and the oven still warm. And he lay there breathing it, and could not have explained to anybody why it made him want to cry. "Come up," Skylar said. "No. Roman, not while you're like this." He was holding Skylar's hand against his own chest, and his voice was not steady, and his eyes were closed. "Ask me in a week, and I'll do anything you want." "Anything." "Not tonight. You don't want me." Roman turned his head and put his mouth against the inside of Skylar's wrist, and held it there. And Skylar felt him shaking. "Don't," Roman said. "Say that to me. Not that one." The fever broke days later. Skylar woke up, clear-headed and human, and disgusting. There was water on the bedside table, a bowl of something on the desk, and Roman asleep sitting up in the chair with his neck at an angle that was going to ruin him. Skylar showered for a long time. He put on clean clothes. He sat down on the end of the bed and looked at the man who had spent 3 days on the floor of his room, and he said the thing that had to be said. "You have to go home," he said. Roman opened his eyes. "That doesn't fix it," Skylar said. "This. You being here for this. It doesn't fix the other thing. I know. You went to that house and you made a deal about my life and you came back and told me to sit still for a week. You did the exact same thing everyone does to me. You just did it nicely. They all do it nicely." His hands were shaking again, and it had nothing to do with being ill. "I need you to go." Roman got up. He put his coat on. At the door he stopped, and he did not argue, and he did not make a case. And Skylar did not forget what he said. "You're right," Roman said. "I'll go." The days after that were the flattest of Skylar's life. He went to lectures and handed in the paper. And he worked his shifts and wiped down the counter at closing, and looked at the wall opposite where nobody was standing. Hansel, who had worked out most of it by then and asked about none of it, started eating dinner in the flat instead of out, and from Hansel that was practically a speech. Skylar stopped sleeping properly. He rang his mother on the Sunday, because he always rang on the Sunday. She asked about his course, and he said it was going well. She told him about a woman at work who had broken her wrist. He sat on the end of his bed with the phone against his ear and said nothing at all about any of it. She had cleaned offices for years to get him into that building. There was no sentence he could have started that would not have ended somewhere she could not follow. He said he loved her and hung up and sat there for a while. He wrote messages he did not send. He saw Roman twice across the courtyard in a week, and both times Roman saw him first and did not come over, because he had been asked not to, and Skylar found that he hated being obeyed considerably more than he had expected to. He heard about the rest of it in pieces, and most of the pieces were wrong, and the true version did not reach him until much later, from Roman, in about 4 sentences, because that was as many as he was ever going to get about that house. Roman had gone back to it. There had been an argument. His father, who was a man of very few words and had never needed more of them, had said one thing at the end of it, which was, "You will regret this in 10 years, and Roman had said, "Probably," and walked out of the front door and had not gone back. What reached Skylar at the time was only the shape of it. That Roman had not taken the placement, that he had given up the flat above the bookshop and was sleeping on a friend's floor in the north of the city with 2 bags and a laptop. He heard that part from Hansel, who had heard it from somebody else, and he sat down on the edge of his bed and put his face in his hands. The scholarship meeting was reopened, exactly as promised, on a Thursday morning. This time there were 4 of them behind the desk. This time there was a word in the letter about withdrawal of funding, and a line about the department's position on undisclosed relationships between students, and Skylar sat in the corridor outside for a while, with his hands between his knees, and understood that whatever he did in the next hour was going to decide the shape of the rest of his life. He had a good answer ready. It was true, and it was tidy. He could say that the relationship was over, which it was, technically, and go back to his lectures, and keep his place, and be careful for the rest of his degree. He went in and did not say it. "Before you start," he said, "there's something I have to tell you, and you're not going to believe it. And I want it in the notes anyway." The woman with the kind face put her pen down, and Skylar, who had never in his life been able to make a speech, who lost his words in every room he had ever been frightened in, sat in a hard chair in front of 4 members of faculty and told them the truth in the worst and most halting way imaginable. He got the first sentence out wrong and started it again. He said that he had been having heats since he was 16. He said he had bought suppressants illegally and lied about a sister. He said that he had told a doctor in that building and been offered a diagnosis and a leaflet, and that the bloods were in his file, upstairs, in the same building, and that anybody in that room could go and look at the numbers on them. He stopped twice because his voice went, and both times he waited and started again rather than let anybody fill it in for him. "I'm an omega," he said. "I know what's on my neck. I'm not asking you to." He stopped and looked at the desk and started again. "There's no form for it. I've looked. There isn't one, so I'm not asking for anything." He took his hands off the table and put them in his lap. "I just don't want it written down that I was a confused alpha in an inappropriate relationship. That isn't what happened. People have been writing things down about me since before I could talk, and I've never said anything about any of it." So, nobody said anything for a moment. "And the relationship," said the man on the left eventually. "He never once asked me to be anything," Skylar said. "He's the only person who never did. You can put that in the notes as well." Quote, "They asked him to wait outside. He waited for a long time, and what he did not know, sitting on that plastic chair in that corridor, was that the complaint the whole thing rested on had been withdrawn days earlier. Devon had walked into the faculty office of his own accord and taken it back in writing. He had explained, in some detail, how those photographs had been taken, and, over how many nights, he had listed the things he had done in corridors since October, so there was no complainant. There was no rule either, and there never had been, and a panel can only act on a rule if somebody is willing to write one down, and nobody in that building was going to be the person who wrote down what Skylar had just refused to take back. Whatever was still being said about him on the other side of the park did not have anything left to be said through. Skylar never saw Devon again after that year, and Devon never came to him about any of it in person. The letter came days later. The funding stood and the file was closed. The medical opinion on file, it said, did not support the account the student had given, and the panel had taken that opinion at face value. And in the second paragraph, in the flat language of an institution that has decided to do the smallest possible amount, there was a line noting that the student had raised concerns regarding the accuracy of his designation record, and that no procedure currently existed for such a review. No procedure currently existed. Skylar read that sentence more times than he could count. It was not a victory, and it was not close to one. But somebody, somewhere in that building, had been made to write it down, and it was the first time in his life that the thing that was wrong with the world had appeared on paper instead of in his body. He found Roman on a Sunday, outside a flat in the north of the city, sitting on the step with a coffee because there was nowhere to sit inside. He looked terrible. He looked like a man who had been sleeping on a floor. "You didn't take it," Skylar said. "No. You didn't tell me you weren't taking it. You asked me to go," Roman said. "I wasn't going to turn it into a bargaining position." Skylar sat down on the step next to him, close enough for their shoulders to touch, and neither of them said anything for a while. "I'm sorry," Roman said. "Not for the money. I don't care about the money, and I'd like you to believe that." He turned the cup around in his hands. "I'm sorry that I went to that house and made a decision about your life in a room you weren't in. You told me what it does to you. You told me the first week, and I heard it. And then I went and did it anyway, because I thought I could carry it better than you could. That's the thing I did. That's what I'm apologizing for." Skylar's throat had closed up. "Say the rest of it," he said. "I decided what you could handle," Roman said. "Same as everybody else has. I thought that made it different. It didn't. It isn't. No." Skylar took the coffee out of his hands and drank some of it and gave it back. "I'm not going to ask you to be brave for me," he said. "I don't need protecting. I just need somebody in the room. That's it. That's the whole thing, and nobody's ever done it. I can do that." Skylar leaned over and kissed him on that step. It was not a careful kiss. Roman's hand came up into his hair and held on hard enough that Skylar heard himself make a sound in the middle of somebody's street, and neither of them stopped for a long moment. When they broke, Roman kept his hand where it was, at the back of Skylar's head, thumb moving slowly over the ring like it was the ordinary place for it to be. "You'll be poor. I'll be poor," Roman agreed. "You're going to hate it. Probably." He looked over. "Ask me again if it changes." Skylar laughed for the first time in weeks, and it turned into something else halfway through, and Roman put an arm around him on the step and held on hard, and neither of them cared who came past. The friend was out. They went up, and the room Roman was sleeping in had a mattress on the floor and 2 bags against the wall and nothing else in it at all. Skylar had thought, for weeks, that when this finally happened he would be frightened. He kept waiting for it to arrive. It did not. What arrived instead, with Roman's coat on the floor and Roman's hands sliding up under his shirt and Roman's mouth working slowly down the side of his throat, was something much closer to relief, the kind that makes a person shake. "Tell me if you want to stop," Roman said against his collarbone. "I'm not going to want to stop. Tell me anyway." He got Skylar's shirt off over his head and then just looked at him, long enough that Skylar started to get his arms up. Roman took his wrists and moved them back down without any hurry at all. That was the moment Skylar understood he was not going to be allowed to hide from any part of this. He was put down on the mattress. Roman's weight settled over him, one thigh between his, and Skylar's spine came up off the mattress at that, and the sound he made got taken straight out of his mouth. Everything after that came in pieces that did not join up properly afterward. A hand flat and hot across his stomach, his own fingers pulling in Roman's hair, the scrape of a jaw against the soft skin under his ear, and then lower down. What he kept, out of all of it, was that Roman would not go straight anywhere, and kept stopping to put his mouth somewhere plain instead. A shoulder, an elbow, the inside of a wrist, like the ordinary parts of him needed covering too. Skylar heard himself say please and did not even mind. Then Roman turned him over onto his front and gathered the hair off the back of his neck and stopped. Skylar lay very still with his face against a stranger's sheet and waited for the thing that had happened his whole life. The pause. The second look. The reassessment. What he got was a mouth on the ring, open and unhurried, and absolutely without apology, tongue along the inside curve of it and teeth just barely set against the skin, and Skylar came apart so completely that he did not recognize his own voice. Roman's hand came round and spread flat across his chest to hold him where he was. "This is yours," Roman said, into the back of his neck. Whatever it says, it's yours, and I want it. Skylar was crying by then and laughing at the same time. Neither of them stopped for a long while after that. The room by morning smelled of the two of them together, and of nothing either of them owned alone. He woke up first. Roman was on his stomach with one arm thrown over Skylar's waist and his face mashed sideways into the mattress, dead asleep, entirely unbothered, and Skylar lay there in a room with no furniture in it and understood that he was not hiding from anybody anymore. They were good, after that. Not fixed, because nothing was fixed, and the ring was still on his neck, and the world was still the world. Good. It is the following winter now, and it is nearly closing time at the bakery on the corner of Hall Street. Skylar has the mop out and the radio on low, and Roman is behind the counter where he is not supposed to be, in the way, as usual, eating the end of a loaf that is going in the bin anyway. He has a job in an accounts office that he does not love and a rented room they share above a hardware shop, and he has developed opinions about bread that Skylar finds unbearable. Somebody comes in for a coffee at the last minute and does the thing people do, which is to look at both of their necks, and then look again, and then decide not to say anything. Do you ever get tired of that? Roman says when the door shuts. Every day of my life, Skylar says. Do you want me to stop coming in? Skylar leans over the counter and kisses him, in the window, with the lights on and the street outside, and takes his time about it. Nobody has fixed anything. There is a letter in a drawer in their room with a line in it about a review that does not exist, and every so often Skylar gets it out and reads that line again and puts it back where it was. But that is next year's problem. And the mop water is going cold, and there is a man leaning on his counter eating bread that was going in the bin, waiting for him to finish. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.